A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Captain Aseem Hashmi speaking from the bridge. First of all, a very warm welcome to all our guests who embark today in New York. I trust you are settling in well, and by now will have already checked in and scanned your card at your designated emergency assembly station on deck 7. If you have not done so already, can I please ask that you attend your designated assembly station in the next 15 minutes at the latest, as this is a mandatory international safety requirement before departure. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to this important announcement and for following the information which is for the safety and well-being of all on board. We wish you an enjoyable voyage. Thank you. Captain. This is the bridge and the time is 12 o'clock noon. A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Captain Aseem Hashmi speaking from the bridge. 5:30 noon navigational brief on Saturday, 1st of November. And to all our guests who embarked yesterday in New York, a very warm welcome on board again, and I hope you are settling in well and finding your way around the ship and exploring all the facilities Queen Mary II has to offer. Just for your information, every sea day at 12 noon, I will give you a navigation and weather update to keep you fully appraised of our passage. You have joined 415 in-transit guests who came across on the westbound crossing. It was quite a windy departure from Brooklyn yesterday, and we needed 2 tugs to assist with the maneuvering, but departing New York is of course a very special sailaway, with the spectacular Manhattan skyline as a backdrop and passing under the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. So here we are on the first day of our eastbound transatlantic crossing to Southampton, and after departing New York, we set on an easterly course initially of 090 degrees, following the coastline off Long Island and the Nantucket Shoals, and awoke this morning in the expanse of the North Atlantic Ocean. Our present position is latitude 40 degrees and 51 minutes north, and longitude 66 degrees and 46 minutes west. And geographically, that places Queen Mary II just south of the Gulf of Maine on our port or left-hand side, and around 150 nautical miles southeast of the Cape Cod Peninsula. And if you're out and about on the open decks, you may have spotted just a couple of minutes ago a US Coast Guard aeroplane just circling us as part of their routine patrol. The route for the next 24 hours will still be on our current east-northeasterly track, steering 070 degrees, which is paralleling the coast of Nova Scotia in Canada towards the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. And since departing New York, we have now sailed 310 nautical miles at an average speed of 18 knots, and we still have 2,780 nautical miles to go to Southampton. For your information, the depth of the Atlantic Ocean at present is relatively shallow, only around 100 meters or 350 deep, as we sail over a shallow area known as George's Bank. But in around 3 hours or so from now, the depth of the ocean will increase to over 2,000 meters or 6,500 feet as we clear the North American continental shelf on the ocean bed. And now for the weather. At present we have partly cloudy skies with the sun breaking through, and in fact very strong winds from a following westerly direction at over 40 knots, which is force 8 on the Beaufort scale, giving rise to a moderate sea state at present, with swell of around 5 meters. Not too bad out on deck, as the wind of course is from a following direction. The current wind and swell conditions are caused partly by the remnants of Hurricane Melissa, which you may have seen on the TV, which is passing some 36 hours ahead of us towards Canada. We will alter course and speed to keep the ship as comfortable as we can until we clear the storm in the next 48 hours, which is now downgraded to a storm. The outside air temperature at present is around 14 Celsius, which is 57 degrees Fahrenheit. The forecast for the next 24 hours is for the sea swell to remain more or less as it is now, but should start easing late tomorrow evening. In the meantime, may I take this opportunity to advise everyone to please take care when moving around the ship, and please use the handrails provided. I will of course keep you fully updated and appraised daily. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the navigational brief for today. and usually at noon I round off my navigational brief with a short nautical themed anecdote, and today the origin of the expression to put a sock in it, which means basically to shut up or keep quiet. Now, without going into technicalities, early gramophones consisted of a revolving disc containing music, a needle to transfer that information, and a large horn to amplify any sound. These instruments were very popular on board sailing ships, as they did not require electricity to make them work. Now, cabins on board sailing ships were, if they were lucky, divided by flimsy bulkheads, if unlucky, by a mere canvas sheet. Sound therefore travelled easily from one section to another. Now, should someone feel like playing music at a particularly antisocial hour, it was not unheard of for a sleepy neighbour to rudely exclaim, "Put a sock in it," meaning, of course, to stuff a sock into the horn and so reduce the sound level. Sadly, due to the damp and miserable conditions found on board sailing ships, not many sailors actually owned a pair of socks, and that's how we got the expression, to put a sock in it. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, may I wish you a wonderful afternoon at Seaport Queen Mary 2, and I look forward to seeing you around the ship. And just a reminder that the ship's clocks have just been advanced by 1 hour, and the time is now just gone 5 minutes past 1. Thank you for your attention and a very good afternoon to you all. Captain. The time is now 12 o'clock noon. A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Captain Aseem Hashmi speaking from the bridge for a daily noon navigational brief on Sunday, 2nd of November, day 2 of our eastbound transatlantic crossing to Southampton. I trust you all had a comfortable night's rest as we continue on our east-northeasterly rum line or straight line course, steering 075 degrees, carrying parallel Nova Scotia in Canada overnight, and currently approaching the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. The Grand Banks is a very large shallow underwater rise, in effect an extension of the North American continental shelf, but underwater. We are taking a more southerly route this crossing to stay clear of the remnants of Storm Melissa, which has now crossed ahead of us towards eastern Canada, and the swell conditions are slowly easing. And since departing New York, we have now covered 790 nautical miles at an average speed of 22 knots, and we still have approximately 2,360 nautical miles to go to Southampton. Our present position is latitude 42 degrees and 32 minutes north, and longitude 56 degrees and 41 minutes west. And geographically, that puts Queen Mary to around 240 nautical miles southeast of Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia, and we're currently passing the Cabot Strait, which is the entrance to the Gulf of St. Lawrence and Quebec City in Canada, on our port or left-hand side. Our route for the rest of the day will continue generally on this east-northeasterly heading towards the southern part of the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, known as the tail of the bank. And as mentioned earlier, the Grand Banks is a relatively shallow area of the ocean. Also, as many of you have been asking, at approximately 2 o'clock in the early hours of tomorrow morning, we will pass around 100 nautical miles north of the last resting place of Titanic on our starboard or right-hand side. So that's passing Titanic's last resting place at 2 o'clock in the early hours of tomorrow morning. On that fateful night back in 1912, it was the Cunard liner the Carpathia, under the command of Captain Arthur Rostron, later Commodore, that responded to the distress call from Titanic and managed to rescue 705 passengers and crew. And if you are interested, there is a fascinating historical information display on Sea Stairway, Deck 5, describing Cunard's involvement in the rescue of Titanic. And now for the weather. If you've been out and about on deck, started off with a rather grey overcast day, but the cloud cover has started to break in the last couple of hours with the sun shining through. We do still have a very strong following winds from the west at over 40 knots, which is Beaufort Force 8, and a rough sea state and a moderate swell of around 4 to 5 meters in height. Outside air temperature is quite pleasant out on deck with the following breeze, mercury showing around 15 Celsius, which is 59 degrees Fahrenheit. The forecast for the next 24 hours is for the winds and sea state to ease slightly overnight, so a reasonably comfortable passage ahead as we clear Storm Melissa. Please do, however, take care when moving around the ship using the handrails provided and when opening the doors to the outer decks in the windy conditions. So ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the navigational brief for today. And now for my usual noontime nautical anecdote, and today is the origin of the expression, bite the bullet. Now bite the bullet means to accept something for what it is, even if not totally pleasant. Now prior to the days of anesthetics, if a sailor was wounded in battle, the most common method of helping the injured person overcome his discomfort was to have him bite on a lead bullet. This also prevented him from screaming out too loudly, something the other members of the crew found upsetting. Of course, much of the success of this treatment depended on the sailor having teeth, and that's how we got to bite the bullet. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, may I wish you a wonderful afternoon as you board Queen Mary 2, and I look forward to seeing you around the ship. And also may I take this opportunity to remind guests on decks 2, 3, 5, 9 and 10 that UK Immigration will be ready to see you in the Britannia restaurant at between 2 and 4 p.m. this afternoon. If you can proceed there, please, with your voyage cards and your passport. So that's UK Immigration for guests on decks 2, 3, 5, 8, 9 and 10 to proceed to the Britannia restaurant for UK Immigration clearance between 2 and 4 p.m. with your voyage cards and your passports. And also just a reminder that the ship's clocks have just been advanced by 1 hour, and the time is now coming up to 5 minutes past 1. Ladies and gentlemen, have a good afternoon and see you around the ship. Captain. The time is now 12 o'clock noon. A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Captain Aseem Hashmi speaking from the bridge for a daily noon navigational brief on Monday, 3rd of November, day 3 of our eastbound transatlantic crossing to Southampton. I hope you all had a comfortable night's rest, as there has been a slight increase in ship's motion today with the changing direction of the moderate and following beam swell. And about 1 hour ago, we also altered course onto a great circle track, currently steering 068 degrees to try and make the ship's motion a little more comfortable with a change in direction of the sea swell. Great circle basically means that we will now follow the curvature of the Earth by altering course every 5 or 6 hours or so, and this is also the shortest and most direct route now to the English Channel. There is a gentle rolling motion on the ship, so please do take care when moving around the ship, and please do use the handrails provided as required. So since departing New York, we have now covered 1,280 nautical miles at an average speed of 21 knots, and we still have approximately 1,850 nautical miles to go to Southampton. Our present position is latitude 44 degrees and 15 minutes north, and longitude 45 degrees and 49 minutes west. And geographically, that puts Queen Mary to around 340 nautical miles southeast of Cape Race, the southeasternmost point of Newfoundland, now astern of us, and around 930 nautical miles south of Cape Farewell, which is the southernmost point of Greenland on our port or left-hand side. And just for your information, the depth of the Atlantic Ocean is quite deep now, around 4,500 meters or almost 15,000 feet, as we pass over a seabed area known as the Newfoundland Basin. And now for the weather, if you've been out and about on deck, quite a mixed morning today. And initially with sunny intervals, and in the last couple of hours it's been rather overcast with passing rain showers, but the sun is now trying to break through. The winds have, however, noticeably eased off from yesterday, currently around 25 knots from the south, from the west, which is Beaufort Force 5, and we have a moderate sea state and swell of around 4 meters. Outside air temperature still quite pleasant with the following winds, mercury showing around 12 Celsius, which is 54 degrees Fahrenheit. The forecast for the next 24 hours is for the winds to veer around to the northwest tomorrow, which will be onto our port or left-hand side, and the sea state should remain more or less as it is now. We will of course try and keep the ship as comfortable as we can, so a reasonably comfortable passage ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the navigational brief for today, and now for my usual noontime nautical anecdote, and today is the origin of the expression, scraping the bottom of the barrel, which means as a last resort. Now slush is the residue left in a barrel of salted meat once the contents have been removed. Since the slush was a particularly obnoxious substance, it was generally felt that someone had to be pretty desperate to go to all the trouble to collect the contents. Now, impoverished ship's cooks were often seen to collect the slush, and while in theory this was the property of the captain, they would often sell the residue onto candle makers for a small sum of money, which was then used to supplement their meagre income. And that's how we got scraping the bottom of the barrel. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, may I wish you a wonderful afternoon as you board Queen Mary 2, and I look forward to seeing you around the ship. And just a reminder that there are no clock changes this afternoon, so no clock changes this afternoon. And may I also take this opportunity to request to everyone who's not been through UK immigration to please proceed to UK immigration in the Britannia restaurant between 2 and 4 p.m. this afternoon. So that's everyone who's not proceeded to UK immigration, regardless of whether you are going ashore, leaving the ship in Southampton, or not UK national. Everyone has to attend UK immigration, please, between 2 and 4 p.m. today. Please do take your voyage card and your passports with you. Ladies and gentlemen, wishing you all a wonderful afternoon. Captain. The time is now 12 o'clock noon. A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Captain Aseem Hashmi speaking from the bridge. Friday noon navigational brief on Tuesday, 4th of November, day 4 of our eastbound transatlantic crossing to Southampton. I hope you all had a comfortable night's rest, as there was noticeably more movement in the ship overnight in the early hours due to the increase in sea swell conditions, which was, to be honest, slightly more than forecast. However, the small localized depression or low pressure weather system to the north of us, where the swell was emanating, is now moving away from us all the time, so conditions should continue to ease somewhat. And since departing New York, we have now covered 1,780 nautical miles at an average speed of 20 knots, and we still have approximately 1,350 nautical miles to go to Southampton, so past the halfway mark. Our present position is latitude 47 degrees and 20 minutes north, and longitude 34 degrees and 45 minutes west. And geographically, that puts Queen Mary 2 around 480 nautical miles north-northwest of the island of Flores in the Azores archipelago on our starboard or right-hand side. And as there's not much around us today, if you're interested, the nearest aircraft which has just flown over us in the last few minutes is a KLM Boeing 787 flying southwestbound from Amsterdam to Panama City at 34,000 feet. And if you're interested also, the depth of the Atlantic Ocean is still quite deep at present, around 4,000 meters or almost 13,000 feet, which is over 2 miles deep. And in the early hours of tomorrow morning, we will pass over the mid-Atlantic ridge on the ocean bed. The mid-Atlantic ridge is basically the constructive tectonic plate boundary between the Eurasian and American plates, and is in effect the longest mountain range in the world, stretching from the southern tip of Africa all the way to Iceland. And whilst the mid-Atlantic ridge is mostly underwater, portions of it have enough elevation to extend above sea level, and this is manifested with the creation of the Azores archipelago to the south of us and Iceland to the north. And now for the weather, it's been a mixed morning today. We initially started off with a sunny and bright day, but in the last half an hour we did have a passing squall with some showers, but that has cleared now and some blue sky finally visible again. The winds are still relatively fresh, around 35 knots from the northwest, which is force 7 on the Beaufort scale, giving rise to a moderate sea state. The outside air temperature today is around 11 Celsius, which is 52 degrees Fahrenheit. The forecast for the next 24 hours is for the wind and sea state to start easing a little overnight, with the wind coming down to around 25 knots and sea state reducing to around 3 meters from the current 5 meters in height, so a little more comfortable passage ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the navigational brief for today, and now for my usual noontime nautical anecdote, and today is the origin of the expression to turn a blind eye, or to intentionally pretend one hasn't seen or noticed something. Now, during the Battle of Copenhagen in 1801, when the British were having a bit of a set-to with the Danish, the then commander of the British Baltic Fleet, Sir Admiral Hyde Parker, feeling things were not going as well as they should, hoisted the signal for Admiral Nelson to disengage. Nelson, never being one to shy away from a good battle, raised his telescope to his blind eye, lost in the previous battle, and declared, "I really do not see the signal." He then went on to win a resounding victory, much to the disgrace of Parker. And that's how we got to turn a blind eye. And finally, just before I finish, ladies and gentlemen, further to the technical issue we had early this morning and the broadcast you may have heard, we will be required to reset some of our electrical propulsion systems, which will mean us having to slow the ship right down temporarily while the reset takes place. So in the next 10 minutes, we will be slowing down and altering course into the wind with a northerly heading to make the motion more comfortable, and then reset our electrical systems, after which we should be back on our way within 20 minutes or so. And whilst we do alter course and slow down, you may feel a slight increase in ship's motion. So please do take care when moving around the ship, minding any swinging doors, and please use the handrails as required. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a wonderful afternoon on board, and I look forward to seeing you around the ship. Captain. The time is 12 o'clock noon. A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Captain Aseem Hashmi speaking from the bridge for daily noon navigational brief on Wednesday, 5th of November, day 5 of our eastbound transatlantic crossing to Southampton. Well, we woke this morning on a beautiful, bright, sunny day here in the North Atlantic as we continue on our Great Circle track, following the curvature of the Earth, which will now take us towards the western approaches to the English Channel, currently on an east-northeasterly course of 080 degrees. And since departing New York, we have now covered 2,290 nautical miles at an average speed of 22 knots, and we still have approximately 840 nautical miles to go to Southampton. Our present position is latitude 49 degrees and 14 minutes north, and longitude 22 degrees and 16 minutes west. And geographically, that puts Queen Mary to around 890 nautical miles south of Reykjavik in Iceland, on our port or left-hand side, and just under 500 nautical miles west-southwest of Mizen Head, the southwesternmost point of Ireland, ahead of us off our port or left bow. And for your information, the depth of the Atlantic Ocean is quite deep now, around 3,500 meters, or almost 11,500 feet, having passed over the mid-Atlantic ridge in the early hours of the morning. And also, just for information, we are currently sailing over lots of underwater telecommunication cables connecting Northwest Europe with Canada and the United States, which carries both modern-day telecommunication and internet data. And it was in fact in July 1858 when the first telegraph cable was laid on the Atlantic Ocean bed, connecting the United Kingdom with the USA. And just 2 weeks later, Queen Victoria sent a congratulatory message to the then US President James Buchanan. That message took over 17 hours to deliver at 2 minutes and 5 seconds per letter by Morse code. And now for the weather. If you've been out and about, nice to see so many of you walking around the promenade deck. A nice bright sunny day with a scattered cloud cover and a fresh following northwesterly breeze at 25 knots, which is force 6 on the Beaufort scale, giving rise to a moderate sea state and reducing swell of around 3 to 4 meters. Outside air temperature, mercury showing around 12 Celsius, which is 54 degrees Fahrenheit. The forecast for the next 24 hours is for both the wind and sea state to start easing off further as we approach the English Channel tomorrow morning, so a comfortable passage ahead. And also, just to keep you advised, ladies and gentlemen, as previously mentioned when we departed New York, we proceeded initially at a slower speed to allow the remnants of Hurricane Melissa to pass ahead of our track, enabling a more comfortable passage. This has meant us losing quite some distance, which we've been trying to make up over the past couple of days. But looking ahead at the prevailing weather conditions and the ocean currents in the English Channel, it does look like we'll be just over 1 hour delayed coming into Southampton on Friday morning, so approximately coming alongside our berth by around 8 o'clock in the morning, rather than 7 o'clock. And whilst we may still be able to regain some lost time, at present it does look like we'll be arriving into Southampton at approximately 8 o'clock on Friday morning. I will of course keep you advised. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the navigational brief for today, and now for my usual noontime nautical anecdote, and today is the origin of the expression to get the sack, or to be dismissed from employment. Now, it was not always easy to find men of quality to crew His Majesty's warships, especially during times of conflict. This could mean that on occasions, some of the men employed fell somewhat below even the minimum standards required by some captains. Still, ships had to sail, and a poor pair of hands was better than no hands at all. At the end of a voyage, when it was possible to reduce the number of crew, the first to go would be those who failed to meet the minimum requirements. Now, rather than pay them off with any form of bounty, the practice was to have the boatswain or other senior petty officer approach the sailor and hand him an old linen sack and just tell him to pack up his gear and leave. And that's how we got the expression, to get the sack. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, may I wish you a wonderful afternoon at aboard Queen Mary 2, and I look forward to seeing you around the ship. And just a reminder that the ship's clocks have just been advanced by 1 hour, and the time is now coming up to 5 minutes past 1. Thank you for your attention, and a very good afternoon to you all. Captain. This is the bridge, and the time is 12 o'clock noon. A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Captain Aseem Hashmi speaking from the bridge for a daily noon navigational brief on Thursday, 6th of November, and the last day of our eastbound transatlantic crossing to Southampton. And 25 years ago today, in 2000, the Cunard line signed the final contract for the construction of Queen Mary 2. At the time, the largest, widest, tallest, and most expensive passenger ship ever built in history. And still today, we proudly hold many of those accolades. Well, back to our passage, and we worked on a generally overcast day, but the cloud cover has started to break in the last couple of hours, and lots of nice blue sky breaking through. And nice to see many of you out and about last night on the gala night, dressed for the Roaring Twenties. And if you were out on deck, you may have seen the bright Beaver Moon. It was quite impressive over the horizon shortly after 10 p.m. We are currently still on our Great Circle track, nearing the end of our Great Circle track, currently steering 092 degrees towards the English Channel. And the distance sailed since departing New York is now just over 2,800 nautical miles, at an average speed of 22 knots. And we still have 330 nautical miles to go to Southampton. Our present position is latitude 49 degrees and 43 minutes north, and longitude 9 degrees and 13 minutes west. And geographically, that puts Queen Mary 2 around 125 nautical miles south-southwest of Cork, in Ireland, on our port or left-hand side. At 5 p.m. this afternoon, we will pass Bishop's Rock Lighthouse off the Isles of Scilly, which traditionally marks the end of a transatlantic crossing, and we then officially enter the English Channel. We will pass around 12 nautical miles south of Bishop's Rock Light, so probably just outside visual range. And at 6:30 p.m. this evening, we will pass Land's End in Cornwall, which is the southwesternmost point of England. We'll be around 24 nautical miles off on our port left-hand side. And then for the rest of the evening, we'll follow the south coast of England for the remainder of our passage to Southampton. For information, the depth of the Celtic Sea at the moment is relatively shallow, currently around 110 metres or 360 feet, as we are now sailing over the northwest European continental shelf on the seabed. And now for the weather, if you've been out and about, quite pleasant out on deck, nice blue skies, and the wind has veered round to the north-northwest on our port side at 25 knots, which is Beaufort Force 5. The sea swell is also reducing all the time now as we approach the English Channel, so a comfortable passage ahead to Southampton. Outside air temperature today, mercury showing 15 Celsius, which is 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomorrow morning, we plan to embark our pilot for Southampton at 5:15 in the early morning, just east of the Isle of Wight, for the 25-mile transit up the Solent and Southampton water to berth at the Mayflower Cruise Terminal, where we hope to be alongside just after 8 o'clock, about an hour later than scheduled due to the weather during the crossing. The weather forecast for our call to Southampton is showing a fog in the morning when we arrive, and then light rain in the afternoon onwards, and the temperature tomorrow reaching a high of 13 Celsius, which is 55 degrees Fahrenheit. May I take this opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to wish all our guests disembarking tomorrow a safe onwards journey home, and thank you for allowing us to take care of you during your time on board. And we look forward to welcoming you back on board a Cunard liner in the not-too-distant future. And for our 316 transit guests who are continuing on to Norway with us next voyage, the all-on-board time for you will be 5 p.m. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the navigational brief for today. Now for my usual noontime nautical anecdote, and today is the origin of the expression, to show a leg. And this is yet another of those sayings that owes its origins to the days of sailing ships. Now, life was obviously very tough on board for the men of war. Hence, it was often necessary to press gang men into service. These men, far from being volunteers, would take every opportunity to jump ship whenever they returned to their home port. Now, in order to prevent this happening, the ships would often anchor some way off the port, making it too far to swim. However, some captains would allow the sailors to bring their wives or sweethearts on board in order for them to be able to spend some quality time together. Now, sleeping quarters were of course at a premium, and for the most part confined to hammocks in large rooms, where upwards of 50 men would sleep together. Come morning time, when the petty officers would come to get the men up for work, they knew that many of the hammocks contained both males and females. Now, the normal method of getting a tardy sailor out of bed was simply to tip up the hammock, thereby depositing the occupant onto the deck. However, in order not to upset or embarrass any females, the petty officer would enter the room and shout, "Show a leg." If the leg found hanging over the hammock was smooth and silky, then that person was allowed to continue sleeping. Of course, should it happen to be hairy and covered in barnacles, then the hammock was tipped over. So gentlemen, the moral of the story is, if you want to have a line in the morning, shave your legs. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, may I wish you a wonderful afternoon at sea aboard Queen Mary 2, and just a reminder that the ship's clocks have just been advanced by 1 hour and the time is 5 minutes past 1. Thank you for your attention and a very good afternoon to you all. Captain.